Oh, good to know.
Yikes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tutorial Tuesday. Woohoo. Just gonna, yes. Hello and welcome. We'll give a few seconds for everyone to be able to sign in. If you feel comfortable, feel free to open your cameras because we love to see your faces. Makes us feel like we're not alone in our living rooms. So we'll give just one last minute for latecomers and then we will get started on one color brioche.
Yay.
So our Tuesday tutorial, or tutorial Tuesday tutorial Tuesday. Which way did we go? Alrighty, so let's get this show on the road. So hello everyone, and well, sorry, I just lost my sample. It just slid right off my desk. Hello everyone, and welcome to our Tutorial Tuesdays hosted by Zen Yarn Garden. Today starts our brioche month. So the entire month of June is dedicated to brioche and all its lovely incarnations. And tonight we start with one color brioche. So let's dive right into it. So what is brioche? Brioche is knitting. It's a fancy knitting, but it's knitting. So there's no reason to be scared of it. If you can knit, you can brioche. It just takes a tiny bit more concentration. But other than that, if you know how to knit, you're good to go. So let's go to my hands and let's see what brioche is all about. So here I have a small sample that I have knit up, and it looks like ribbing, which it is because brioche is a type of rib. However, when I flare it out a little bit, oh, dear me, that is not regular ribbing. Looks like there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. However, there really isn't. So without further ado, here we go with brioche. Now this sample, I just want to keep this in mind. I did not put edge stitches on this at all. So don't panic when you see the first stitch, okay? All right, here we go. So brioche is basically slip one, knit one with a yarn over. That's all it is. So what do I mean by slip one, knit one with a yarn over? I mean this stitch here, which as you can see is a purl or something that looks like a purl. It's all alone. If I compare it to the stitch right next to it here, which is the knit side of the rib, it's got like a piece of yarn going on top of it here. So what am I going to do? I'm going to bring my yarn to the front in order to create a yarn over that slipped purl stitch. Because what happens when I go to knit, my yarn is still in front here. I slip my purl. I'm going to knit the next one. It creates a yarn over. So once again, yarn to the front, slip that purl stitch, and then knit the knit stitch. We see the rib here, which is the knit rib, with the yarn over. Now, if you're wondering how we got to those yarn overs, we will be looking at how to set up brioche. But setting up brioche, when you actually have some kind of clue about what brioche is, it's going to be a heck of a lot simpler. So this is why I'm showing you the actual stitch before the setup. All right, so once again, bringing the yarn to the front, because this purl, as we can see, is all alone. This knit has a yarn over. So I need to do a yarn over my purl. So how do I do that? Bring my yarn to the front, slip the purl, and knit the knit stitch with that yarn over. Now there's an actual term for knitting that knit stitch with its yarn over, and it's called a brioche knit. And in the knitting world, we like to call those barks because they are abbreviated BRK. So in brioche knitting, you will often hear about barks, which is this part, which is knitting that knit stitch with the yarn over, and burps, which we will look at later on tonight. No panicking, because what is a purl except just a variation of knit? And that's all a burp is compared to a bark. So back to our barks. Now, forward, slip the purl, knit the next one. Yarn forward in order to create that yarn over when I go to knit the next knit stitch. So as you can see, I'm slipping one stitch and then knitting the next one, slipping one stitch, knitting the next one. Where have we seen that kind of pattern before? An Italian cast on will have that, a tubular cast on. If you've ever done one of those, it's the same kind of principle, except you're not doing the yarn over. So I'm going to start here with a bark. And once again, now, as you may have noticed, I actually got to the end of my row and I turned. Now, what do I do on the return row? I do the exact same thing. So yarn to the front, slip that purl stitch, and then with my yarn still in front, go directly to knit, or bark in this case, since I'm brioche knitting, the knit stitch. So what all is going on is on one row, I'm slipping the purl ridge, and then on the return row, I end up slipping the knit ridge. I'm just alternating. However, because we're working back and forth in one color, you only ever need to do barks. You only ever need to do the exact same thing, which is yarn to the front, slip the purl stitch, which is all by itself, and bark, creating that yarn over. So once again, yarn to the front, slip the purl side stitch, and knit. Yarn to the front, slip.
Maybe you could show a couple with picking instead of throwing, because it does feel a little bit. Ah, there we go.
So here we go with, now remember, I am not a natural picker. So this may seem a little awkward, but yes, trying. So once again, yarn to the front, slip that purl stitch, and then I'm gonna go and knit. You see how I'm kind of holding that yarn over so that it doesn't go anywhere? I'm just putting my finger on it so that I can then knit. So yarn to the front, slip, and knit. Yarn to the front, slip, and knit. Now remember how I said I had no edge stitches? That's your pattern. There are very, very, very few. I've never actually come across a pattern that didn't have some kind of edge stitch during brioche. So I don't want you to worry on edge stitches right now, because we're just looking at the basics for tonight. So I have gotten to the end of my row once again. I've got this nice smooshy fabric, and we're going to go one last row. So if I'm looking at it closely here, this is a knit ridge, so this is a purl. do? Yarn over with my pearl and work.
And maybe just talk about the difference between an actual yarn over and what you're doing here.
An actual yarn over would normally be between 2 stitches. So I just finished a bark here. If I was going to do a yarn over, I would simply yarn over and then knit the next stitch or purl the next stitch, whatever, creating a hole, because a yarn over will create that hole. So what I'm doing now, yes, it's a regular yarn over, but because I'm slipping that next stitch, that yarn over is actually wrapping around that stitch.
It kind of sits on top of it like a hood. Sometimes they call it a hood.
Exactly. And it does create a little X. And we like X's because they mark the spot. Pirates knew what they were about. So yarn to the front, or you can call it a yarn over, slip the next stitch, and knit. Now, how do we start this? Now that we know, let me just find my needle and yarn here, because that went crashing out of oblivion. All right, here we go. I'm back. So what kind of cast-ons work for brioche? It really is going to depend on what your finished object is going to be. Whoop, nearly fell off my chair there again. We'll just switch back. Sorry. I have trouble with my computer tonight. Sorry, everyone. All right. So what kind of cast-on will work with brioche? It really depends on what you're making. If it's going to be something for example, if you're doing ribbing at the bottom of a sweater, you're going to want something very stretchy. So you could go with an Italian cast-on, which looks really, really beautiful when it then follows into brioche, because it's ideal really for knit one, purl one type ribbing. If you're knitting something like a scarf, you can afford to do a slightly firmer cast on, which is what I'm going to show you right now. So basically a long tail will work fine, a knitted cast on, a cable cast on, basically any cast on that works for you and that you're able to do consistently will work. Because brioche is very, very stretchy, you may want to cast on using a much larger needle if casting on tends to be a little bit tight for you. However, I find that for the edge of a scarf, it can be nice to have that kind of like slight curvature at the bottom that makes it kind of cute.
And brioche is like so naturally squishy and thick.
It's extremely squishy, because remember that you're actually only knitting 1 out of 2 stitches every row. So you're creating a double thickness fabric. So it's a tremendously smooshy fabric and very comfortable to wear around your neck. And it can look good in basically any size yarn. So is there any special technique to the cast on that you need to add in order to cast on brioche? Nope. As you can see, I'm doing a regular old long tail. Got 7 stitches here. 10. So let's go with 12 stitches. Here we have regular cast on. Now, setup row to brioche, now that we've seen what brioche is actually all about, will make a lot more sense. So on this sample, I am going to do an edge stitch. So I'm going to slip that first stitch with the yarn in front. Now, I want this to be my knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, which is where an Italian cast on comes in really handy, because your knits and your purls are already determined. Knit stitch, I would knit just a regular knit stitch, but since my yarn is already in the front, I'm going to go ahead and slip. So again, your pattern will tell you how to do your setup row. I'm just showing you the actual process involved. So my yarn was in front, I slipped that first stitch. I'm going to go knit the next. Yarn in front, slip one stitch, and knit the next. Now, is this looking familiar at all to anyone? Like what we've been looking at for the last 10 minutes? Oh, look. So slip and knit, yarn to the front, slip, and the yarn over is created automatically when I then go to knit the next stitch. Yarn to the front, slip, and knit. Now remember I said I was going to do an edge stitch on this one, so I'm just going to knit my edge stitch right now. And we are set up for brioche. It does take a few rows in order for the brioche to start popping up, because it's going to look a little wonky at first. It's normal. Don't panic. So here we go. Let's do the edge stitch. And here I have, now we start to see it very clearly that my bump is right here in front. So this is a purl and it doesn't have a yarn over. So my yarn is in front. I'm going to slip this one and knit the next one, or bark in this case. Yarn to the front, slip, and bark. Yarn to the front, slip, and bark. So what is the difference between the preparation row and the actual knit or brioche knitting? Is that yarn over that's missing from the prep row. That's what you're creating on the prep row. So here we go. Now, do we have any questions concerning the brioche knit? Do we have any questions?
I think so. We had one person that wraps their the yarn in the opposite direction on the purling, but this.
But you're not actually purling.
Yeah, right. So
you're never purling on this one.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing that you're doing is knitting. You're slipping your purls.
Mm-hmm. And your purls were knit on the previous row, so they'll be in the correct direction too. Exactly. But if you do happen to wrap your knits the opposite of normal, then you will have a little bit of an issue with your yarn overs. Your yarn overs just need to line up with the same way that you wrap them.
Yeah.
But
although if for anyone following along, when you're doing one color back and forth, or brioche flat knitting, brioche flat one color, you will never have to purl. If you're just going back and forth in one color, you never ever purl, because you're always slipping your purls, which, because we're in knit one purl one type ribbing, when you switch, well, you're slipping the knits from the previous row by slipping the purls.
And that leads into the next question, which is one pass considered one row? And I think most patterns do say, you know, run one row is one pass, but you're right, technically you're only working every other stitch each pass.
Yeah, so technically, in order for it to have like its completion, 2 passes will equal 1 row ish. It's this will actually be much clearer when we do 2 color brioche next week. Yes. But 1 color brioche, it's a bit like ribbing in the sense that it really, as long as your cast on is directional, this is what you're going to want to be paying attention to. So here I have my nice side of my long tail cast on. So the nice side, as opposed to the wrong side. So So, but again, it depends on the cast on that you use. If you're using an Italian cast on, then either side is going to be absolutely lovely. So let's go to Suzanne, who is going
Yeah,
to
we're gonna
talk
show,
about,
we're gonna show a couple of different patterns with brioche in them so that you get a chance to see,
yes,
those. Hi, I'm Suzanne. And the first one I'm going to show you is actually a pattern that I designed. So this one is called Making Waves Cowl, and it is knit in the round. It's 2-color brioche in the round, which we're going to cover in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to cover 2-color brioche, so that will give you a good head start. But this is a fun pattern. It does have some syncopated brioche, which I think I'll also cover when we do the 2-color brioche in the round, because it just goes really well together, and you already know so much about brioche that it won't be that much more. But this is, yeah, we have kits in superfine DK, and I believe the Serenity DK also. The pattern comes with a little cozy, so you can get some practice doing that, and then get to work on the cowl. So that's that one. We also have, let's see, sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing here for a second and then show our next pattern, which is a shawl. And this pattern is a really good beginning brioche. It's also 2-color. So sorry, let me get this up for you. It's also 2-color, so you might want to wait until next week or get this ordered so that you can start it next week when we talk about 2-color brioche. But it really 2-color brioche and 1-color brioche are, you know, not too much different. And I sometimes think 2-color brioche is easy because you can see what's going on a little bit more easily. But they're both great things. So,
however, in order to do 2-color brioche, you do need to know how to burp.
Yes,
Oh,
yes. Which, are we going to cover that this time, or is that what you're going to get to next?
This is what we are going to cover next.
All right. But wait, before that, we do have a coupon code for you.
Coupon code.
So you do have 20% off with the code 1color brioche. And that is good for 48 hours. So take advantage of that. The coupon is good for anything on the website. That includes the patterns and kits and knit-alongs. So be sure to check out all of those because they're a lot of fun too. And now I'll let Nick show you the bark or burp.
Burp. All right. So in order to do 2-color brioche, unfortunately, you can't just stick with the bark. You do need the purl equivalent, which we affectionately call a burp because it is a brioche purl. So BRP. So if we go to my hands, now this was the sample that I was doing in the bark. And here is a sample that I did in the burps. Looks pretty darn similar, doesn't it? Except for the color. So how do we do burps? They are essentially, it's the same process. So you're slipping one stitch, purling the other, because we're working on pearls, because these are burps. So now I do have an edge stitch on this sample, so I'm just going to do my edge stitch. Now, remember how on barks we were knitting the knit ones? I can't do a bark here because look, my knit stitch has no yarn over. If it has no yarn over, that means I'm slipping it. This one. Burps and barks, same principle. If it doesn't have a yarn over, that's the stitch you're slipping. If it's got a yarn over, that's the stitch that you're either barking or purling. So how does that work? I'm going to slip the knit one, yarn over, but this time I do need to do the actual going all the way around because I'm purling my next stitch. or burping in this case. So here we go with the purl and the yarn over. There we go. Now my yarn is to the front naturally. Slip the next stitch, which is the knit. You see how it doesn't have a yarn over? It needs a yarn over, which means I'm slipping and creating a yarn over. So slip and yarn over. And this one, it's actually a little bit clearer that you're really wrapping around that stitch. See how it starts before and pops out after.
Mm-hmm. It's like it's over the top of it.
Exactly. And then I've got my purl here with its wrap. So I'm going to burp those together. Now, once
and we
again,
just had a question pop up. You do always slip purlwise. Yep.
Always slip purlwise. Yes. Whether you're barking or burping, always slip purlwise. Always, always, always. So no wrap, so it needs a wrap. Yarn over and burp. So if you know how to purl, this should look pretty familiar. And since we just looked at bark, this should also look familiar because it's just the purl equivalent of the bark. So once again, if it's got no wrap, it needs a wrap. If it's getting a wrap, it's getting slipped. That's one way to think of it. So if it's got no wrap, it needs a wrapping. It's all naked. It needs a dress. There we go. So how am I going to dress it up? I'm going to put a yarn over on top of it. And see how X marks the spot every single time. X marks the spot. So all the way to the front, since I am burping. Now, I'm not going to show you how to cast on for this one because I have never, ever, ever come across a pattern that casts on with burps.
Yeah, but so, if you happen to be one of those people that likes to purl better than knitting, then you could definitely switch any of these patterns to just purl the whole thing.
Absolutely. I mean, these people are few and far apart, and hats off because most people hate purling.
If you're like a Norwegian knitting, or you do the like tensioning with the pin or around your neck or something, you might want to do that.
Yeah, if you're doing the Portuguese knitting with the flicking of the thumb, yeah, that could be pretty fast too.
It's faster to purl then.
It is
another one. Does it use more yarn than regular knitting? I would say because it makes the fabric fluffier, it might, but you're getting a thicker fabric. So,
does it use more yarn, Eloise? Yes,
but because the fabric is thicker, not because
because remember that you're having to go back and forth to actually technically work all the stitches. Mm-hmm. So in that way, it's a little bit like garter, where garter does take more yarn than just your regular stockinette to get to the same height. Mm-hmm. Let's put it that way. But it creates such a smooshy fabric that,
it's really a lot different than just ribbing too, than regular ribbing. It's squishier.
It's much, much, much smooshier than regular ribbing. It also doesn't pull in quite as much as regular ribbing. It will tend to lay a little bit more open than regular ribbing, which eventually, the knits just look like they're basically one next to the other and all smooshed together. So this one does tend to lay a little bit more open. There we go. So we are now at 7:30, and this concludes our tutorial for tonight on barks and burps. Mm-hmm. Because once you master the bark and the burp, well, then you can, the sky is the limit. Once you have your bark and your burp, you can do one color, you can do syncopated brioche, you can do 2-color brioche, you can do 2-color syncopated brioche. There is just no limit to what you can do once you have mastered your barks and your burps.
Yes, and we are gonna, there's a lot of questions we are going to cover a lot more in next tutorials, but
Yes.
but yeah, your pattern will tell you about whether you're going to bark or burp, just like a normal
absolutely
pattern.
always. Yep. And again, if you're doing one color brioche, chances are you're never going to see a burp. Chances are when you're doing one color brioche knit flat, you're always going to be barking. So chances are, I didn't say always, but chances are very, very, very good that you will always be barking. However, if two color brioche is something that you would like to, you know, adventure into, you will need that burp. So practice the barks and the burps, and next week we will get into two color brioche, and then the week after we have increases and decreases in brioche, and then on the last night of our June brioche month, fixing mistakes. Woo! How did I get roped into that? Yeah, fixing mistakes in brioche is fun. It is an adventure, let me tell you that. So I hope all of you will stick around all the way until the end of the month when we finally look at how to fix all the lovely stuff that we've done.
And we had one more question about just, you know, increasing for like an asymmetrical shawl. And we're going to be covering increasing and decreasing, but I think more of like in the patterning, but I think we'll cover that also, right? Just increasing to make it bigger.
The
Not
increasing on the shawl, if it's at the edge, increasing in brioche, because you have to increase both on the right side and the wrong side at the same time. It's the same principle, whether you're increasing within whatever it is that you're working in, or if you're patterning inside of it, or on the edge, it's actually the same increase technique. So make sure to pop in 2 weeks from now for increases, which you will use either at the beginning, the middle, or the end. So do we have any other questions before we go? Because we are out of time. So we hope to see you all next week when Suzanne does two color brioche. Yes, Barbara, you do need to register every week. So I think the so
yeah, it is all, they're all separate.
Yes.
So you do just register each time.
They're all separate, so you do need to re-register every week. So make sure you get that register. And oh, and there we go. We have the link for two color brioche sign up is in the chat right now. So get that before
click on it,
close
and then
the chat.
it'll open your browser and you won't have to go searching for it.
And if you register right away, well, then you're done. You can just show up next week. So, and don't forget the one color brioche code to use at checkout for a 20% discount site-wide, which is good for, well, everything on the site since it is site-wide, including our knit-alongs and our grab bags, which, as some of you know, we are quite fond of. We do love those. All right, so if there are no last minute questions, we will sign off here for tonight, and we will see you all hopefully for two color brioche next week. Yay. Thanks everyone, and have a fabulous evening.